Parents who killed their children reacting to death sentences. There is nothing more heartbreaking than a parent's love and care turning into a murderous rage. Timothy Jones Jr. may seem like your average single dad, but deep down he hides a true monster. In South Carolina, divorced father of 5, Timothy Jones Jr., snapped and murdered all 5 of his children, even after years of raising them and putting them through school. The last words uttered by his children were when one of his sons spoke to his mom on the phone before 6-year-old Nathan was strangled by his own dad in bed. In a panic, Jones killed all the other 4 in fear of getting caught. What's heart-shattering is that apparently his oldest girl, 8-year-old Mara, proclaimed that she loved him as he was about to take her life. Timothy tried to get rid of the bodies and did so heartlessly by mutilating them, covering them in bleach and leaving them on a rural road in Alabama. However, Timothy would not get away with it when he was stopped by police who found blood in his car, as well as a handwritten note on mutilating bodies and material to produce meth. Add to the fact that Jones himself was high on synthetic marijuana.
2 or more persons were murdered by the defendant by act or pursuant to one scheme or course of conduct in the murder of a small child under the age of 11 or younger.
Timothy Jones admitted to everything, including where he was supposed to drop the bodies, as well as the harrowing details, such as saying that his hands were too big for their necks and that he had to use a belt. Clearly evil, Jones tried to use the insanity plea of a demon telling him to commit the act, and that he was scared his kids would kill him.
And the murder of 5 children, 11 years of age or younger. Now recommend to the court that the defendant, Timothy R. Jones Jr., be sentenced to death.
The court didn't buy Jones's insanity act and deemed his horrendous murder a conscious decision, handing him the death penalty. Timothy Jones's heinous acts are matched only by Justin Ross Harris. In Georgia, 22-month-old Cooper Harris suffered silently in a burning hot car for hours until his tragic death. The reason? His own father, Justin Ross Harris, who'd taken his son to breakfast, then forgot to take him to daycare before work, leaving him strapped to the car seat to die a slow and painful death of hypothermia. Bystanders called 911 and Justin was arrested. However, while this may have been brushed off as completely accidental, it seemed like more was at hand when a woman testified in court that Harris was involved in sexual affairs with her when she was only 16 or 17. Worst of all, these sexual texts were sent on the day of Cooper's death. While Cooper was suffering in the car, Justin was sexting another child. On the case, the witness said, when it started, it was strictly sexual. Then at times, it would be like a normal conversation. Cooper was as tone-deaf as he was neglectful, as during an investigation, he claimed he was a great dad and started discussing having other children with his wife. He gained zero sympathy, especially from the court, as he was charged with malice murder, felony murder, cruelty to children, sexual exploitation of children, and dissemination of harmful materials to minors. After some discussions regarding retrial, he was sentenced to life in prison without parole and an additional 32 years. Whether out of guilt or fear, some murderers instantly admit to their crimes, like Michael Wayne Jones. In Ocala, Florida, Michael Wayne Jones was responsible for the murder of his entire family. It started in September 2019, when Casey Jones's mother was worried about her daughter, who hadn't contacted her in weeks. Police arrived at Jones's house and were met with instant shock when they smelled a foul odor of decomposition. Little did they know it was Michael's 4 kids. Before that revelation, however, Michael was involved in a car crash with his wife, but that's when Michael, out of nowhere, admitted to everything he'd done, including killing his wife with a metal bat and killing his 4 kids by drowning or strangling them. Jones even gave the authorities directions for the bodies. Whether he did that out of guilt or shock is anyone's guess. In court, Jones pleaded guilty instantly. Defense argued that the cause of the murder was psychological problems as well as poor family life as a child. But this didn't stop the judge, however, who agreed with the jury's recommendation for the death penalty. It seemed like Jones was totally fine with anything, without a single ounce of emotion on his face. He received the death penalty without a trial. It's truly mind-bending how some people were even allowed to become parents, just like Andrea Bradley and Glenn Bates. In Cincinnati, Ohio, 2-year-old Glenara Bates lost her life after months of torture and abuse by her own parents. Andrea Bradley and Glenn Bates. Andrea Bradley already had 5 children who'd been placed in foster care due to several abuse charges made against her. But when social workers kept ignoring the case, the children were returned to Bradley and suffered the consequences. In December 2014, Bradley took Glenara to the hospital, where the signs of the terror her parents had inflicted on her were shown. She had human bite marks, whip marks, scars, and she only weighed 13 pounds. Which is about the average weight for a 6-month-old baby. Glenara's father, Glenn Bates, admitted to hitting her with a belt and swinging her from her feet at a wall.
The children testified that they witnessed him pick up Glenara and swing her by her feet and slam her against the wall.
Investigations show that Glenara even slept in a tub of human feces. Her parents treated her worse than an animal, and they were about to be caged like one. Andrea and Glenn kept changing their statements and playing a blaming game, but the law didn't care. They were both guilty. Since Glenn seemed to be the far worse offender, he was handed the death penalty, while Andrea got 15 to life because of her incredibly low IQ of 67, which shouldn't have been enough for her to have 5 children in the first place. Nobody had any sympathy for Glenn and Andrea, no matter how many tears she could shed in court. As for Glenn, though, his life was literally saved by a racist juror whose statements about black people making her feel uncomfortable were enough for a retrial. The retrial changed his sentencing from death to 25 years in prison, while everyone argues that he should have gotten way more. A murder weapon could be a gun or a knife, but extreme veganism was a shocking weapon for Sheila OLeary. In County Lee, Florida, Sheila and Ryan OLeary were devout vegans, but forcing their lifestyle on their 3 kids had disastrous effects. The kids were only fed raw fruits and vegetables, leading them to be malnourished, but the extreme restriction reached murderous heights when their 18-month-old son Ezra died in September 2019 from his malnourishment at a shocking weight of 17 pounds, the average weight for a 7-month-old baby. Apparently, their other kids, a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old, were suffering from the same conditions, but the parents were finally caught for their abuse before what happened to Ezra repeated itself. When the couple was arrested, police discovered that Ezra hadn't been fed for a week prior to his death, as well as the fact that the parents completely ignored his inability to breathe on the night of his death. Ryan and Sheila were charged with aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and child neglect. Even worse, Ryan's dirty laundry came out, and he had an extra charge for child molestation. In court, Sheila had no comment, as would any mother responsible for the death of her own child. She received 2 concurrent 30-year sentences, while Ryan received 1 30-year sentence in a no-contest plea. At least their kids could now live a normal life without their unqualified parents. While at least some of Sheila's kids survived, the daughter of Seth Welch and Tatiana tragically did not. In a Kent County, Michigan home, conditions were so inhumane that 10-year-old Mary Welch tragically lost her life to malnourishment and neglect by her parents, Seth Welch and Tatiana Fusari. Instead of providing a comfortable and fun environment for little Mary, Seth and Tatiana had vermin, insects, and mold. If only that was the worst indicator of Seth and Tatiana's loony status, because apparently they refused medical assistance for religious reasons. Not sure what God would allow a 10-month-old child to die horribly instead of taking medicine, but it's definitely not one that saved Seth and Tatiana, who were charged with felony murder. Ironically, when the chips were down, Tatiana turned on Seth, blaming him for not stopping Mary from seeing a doctor and for being abusive. The law didn't care much who was responsible for what, though, because Seth and Tatiana were both found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
That is a charge called homicide felony murder. It is life without parole. It requires a DNA sample to be taken upon arrest.
Somehow, the sentencing shook the couple to their core, as if they didn't know murderers went to prison. As far as the worst parent in all of these, it has to go to Mitchell Blair. In Detroit, Michigan, authorities arrive at the home of Mitchell Blair, who was getting evicted for refusing to get a job. But what they found in that home was frightening. Inside a freezer, the bodies of her children, Stephen and Stoney, were found, wrapped in plastic bags. Apparently, the bags were there for 3 years. Upon examination, it turned out the 2 children were killed in mind-bogglingly horrific ways, such as suffocation, skinning with scalding water, forcing them to drink Windex, choking with a belt, and beating to death. Blair had no option but to confess, but she quickly showed how deluded and demented she really was when she claimed the children were demons who sexually abused her youngest son, Matthew. There was no evidence whatsoever to back this. With the twisted methods she used to kill her children, it was clear who the real demon was here. In court, Blair continued to act despicably to everyone, including the judge, whom she kept interrupting. Blair had the nerve to claim she'd never lied, but the judge soon gave her a well-deserved lesson. It was clear from the judge's tone that she couldn't even fathom that someone could have done this. Blair then stood quietly as she was sentenced to a life in prison.